Thanks very much, Dave, and welcome my fellow commissioners to the 97th meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. We have a pretty full agenda here this morning, so we'd like to get started. Apologize for people that might have been waiting online for us to show up, but we had a few technical issues to sort out before we joined you. And so hopefully everyone can now hear that's online. So maybe, Dave, the first thing to do, if you wouldn't mind, is bringing up the agenda for today's session of the Finance and Admin Committee. While you're bringing that up, just wanted to see, Glenn, if you had any opening comments before we got into the agenda.
Introduction. I won't take too much time. This is my first commission meeting, Glenn Merrill, and I think I've worked with many of you over the years. A lot of you I don't know, however. I'm looking forward to getting to know you and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I think continuing on a theme with the U.S. commissioners of late, we will try and work as constructively as we possibly can on many issues. I think there are a number of challenges that we have, as we have with any large institution that's been in place for a long period of time, but I'm looking forward to our ability to coordinate and cooperate as much as possible on issues, and where we can't find agreement, hopefully begin to work on a longer term process to seek resolution on issues. Looking forward to working with a lot of stakeholders, and I think it's unfortunate that we're not able to be in Victoria for this meeting. I know conducting this meeting virtually is a challenging one, so I appreciate everyone's patience. Particularly the stakeholders who I think are having a challenge perhaps interacting with us as we normally do during committee meetings. So thanks again for the opportunity and looking forward to working with everyone.
Paul, I think you're mute.
Thanks, Bob, for recognizing that. Glenn, thanks for those opening comments. Likewise for myself, I think this meeting, as just witnessed by not unmuting my button before speaking, is going to have a few technical issues as we move forward, and hopefully as we go through the next 4 or so days that some of those issues will become more routine than having to think about them every time. What I'd like to say as well is that we have worked well as a commission over many decades, and I anticipate that going forward into the future. As any sort of commission or family, if you will, there's always going to be a few road bumps in the way. We've sorted them out in the past, and I'm still sure we will in the future. So welcome, Glenn, to working with us as a U.S. Commissioner. I think as before we get into the actual F&A committee business, we need to elect a vice chair, and I think, Bob, you have a motion to make.
Yes, through the chair, I would make a motion that Glenn Merrill be the vice chair of the International Pacific Halibut Commission.
Thanks, Bob. Do we have a seconder?
Yeah, I can second that. This is Commissioner Degree.
Thank you, Peter. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to the motion? Not seeing any hands up. I'm going to ask if anyone has any opposition. Not expecting any, but thought I'd just be formal about it. Not seeing any of that, so congratulations, Glenn. You will be the vice chair for this meeting for this session.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Bob, and others.
All right. Dave, were there any opening comments on your side that you wanted before we got into the agenda to see if there was anything that we needed to update on the agenda? All right. So if that's the case, why don't we've adopted, and we'll move forward with the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That means that we would move on to agenda item 3, if you agree, and we'll ask for that paper to be brought up briefly. This is just an update on the actions arising from the last Finance and Administration Committee, FAC096, which was held in February of this year. This paper, as we do with all of the subsidiary bodies and also the Commission meeting itself, is simply meant to provide a tracking of the decisions that were made by that subsidiary body, in this case the FAC, and the work that has been undertaken by the Secretariat and others relevant to those recommendations in the intersessional period. Appendix A of this paper outlines those recommendations and requests. There were only recommendations from the FAC in February of 2020. I believe there were 7, all of which have been completed. Now, noting that this is a subsidiary body of the Commission and it meets immediately prior to the Commission, the recommendations of the FAC go to the Commission meeting itself for noting or action of some description. And that's where, in this case, we've indicated what the decision was of the Commission at AM096 held in February of 2020 as well. Each of these recommendations or endorsements or notings and agreements from the Commission are then going to be reported out at the AM097 meeting later this afternoon. And again, that will be at AM97 paper 03 for those further updates. So we are very happy to report that, as I said earlier, we have completed all of the actions requested of us, and you've been a part of quite a number of special sessions, intersessional decision-making process to make those recommendations happen throughout 2020. And so with that, Chair, it's simply a matter of asking the Commission to note paper 03, which has provided the FAC with an opportunity to consider the progress made intersessionally. Thank you, Chair. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. I'll see if there are questions for you from commissioners. Don't see any hands up, but maybe I'm looking in the wrong part of the screen. No one has any questions, it would seem, Dave. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify, and my apologies here. I'm looking at
thank you through the chair. That would be covered under the next agenda item 4.
Under, I believe it's paragraph 6, page 2 of 2.
Okay, well, with that, Chair, then, with your agreement, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the financial statement for FY 2020, and I would like to pass to Mr. Keith Jernigan, the Assistant Director of the Commission, to present that on behalf of the Secretariat. That would be covered under the next agenda.
Okay, my apologies. I'll wait.
I'll take that if I may, specifically regarding this item, and just for everybody's eyes, because I am aware it's quite small on the screen. So this is the leases and contracts 52300, and the 2.5.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And through the chair, I would like to present paper number 4. So the purpose of this paper is to provide the FAC with a year-end financial statement for FY20. In FY20, the original budgeted amount was $759,000 greater than the expected income. However, in AM096, At AM096, the Commission noted that the general fund was approved with the expectation that would run a loss of $759,000. Due to the fish sales being a negative $1.2 million, we were able to reduce it, but not a total of $759,000, and we'll show that in the coming slides. The financial position of the Commission is stated here collectively as it is in the auditor's report, but also by fund. So in the coming slides, you'll see a consolidated statement of our financial position and activities for the year, but you'll also see it by fund. And the purpose of this is following through the FAC, and that is moving from a consolidated only statement and supplemental for FIS to a fund balance, identifying each of the funds that we've called out in our financial regulations. This is the balance sheet in accrual basis for all funds of the Commission. Again, this is all the monies, all the assets that we have at the year end. Assets, liabilities, and equity. And for assets, we were at $3 million for the year. Liabilities, we had 1.1, and then equity 1.9 for a total of $3 million. And we'll show these further breakdown in the coming slides. This is the FY20 balance sheet by fund. This is where we want to get to. You'll see this in the next paper in the auditor's report, whereas the financial statements are consolidated and they're not broken out by fund. Moving forward, we want to break out our financial statements by fund. And here we'll show that. Balance sheet in accrual basis. The totals match the previous slide, but in this case, it's by fund. Budget to actuals. For FY20, this is budget to actuals of all funds. This is cash basis to show the cash that came in for the year FY20. Now we have contributions by both contracting parties, and we've separated the pension for both contracting parties as income. You also see the headquarters lease and maintenance listed, and a separate line item for grants, contracts, or agreements that we may have. Further on down, you'll see fish sales and fish sales for byproduct, and then some cleanup with gains and loss. Budget to actual, again, all funds. Previous slide was the income, and this slide is expenses. So overall, what you're going to see here moving forward is we're transitioning, as I presented at the interim meeting, from the true fund accounting, so updating our chart of accounts. So you'll see in some areas where there is $0 for the budget, where there was actual expenses, we're working hard to code each transaction properly to the correct expense. And again, these line up with the auditor's report that you'll see in the next paper. This is the income statement by fund. Again, moving from these consolidated to a breakout by fund for our general operating expenses, research, catch up our statistics, FIS, and our reserve fund. Both income and expenses for FY20. Fund activity summary. This is an interesting slide. This will show the restricted and unrestricted funds. It also has the legacy funds that were associated with bank accounts for leave liability, annuitant medical, and scholarship. This slide shows that those funds and accounts were closed and those monies were transferred. Likewise, you'll see transfers moving forward in this presentation. So the unrestricted general operating expense just says basically we're using that for general operating expenses, whereas the restricted funds have some restrictions. Research, statistics, They may receive grants, and those grants are specific to the project, so therefore they're restricted. Through our financial regulations, we restricted FIS and reserve, specific reasons, so they would be considered restricted by the Board of Commissioners. Statement of financial activities by month. This is interesting to show where in the beginning of the year, January, February timeframe, we're going to have large expenses to purchase bait. So it's interesting to show here also income, where previously we were receiving income from contracting parties later in the fiscal year, February, April. This year, I'll show that paper 6, but this year we received all of our funding from Canada at the beginning of the fiscal year, and half of that from the U.S., half of their contracting party contribution at the beginning of the year, which is very helpful and very much appreciated. So then the expenses pick up towards the end of the year as the FIS is up and running. So expenses at the beginning of the year to get that bait running, and then more expenses later in the summer as FIS progresses. And very important for us to receive those contributions at the beginning of the year and to continue to build up our working capital as presented at the last FAC to mitigate any uncertainties with FIS and to ensure that those operations are moving forward. And through this paper, we would like the FAC to note paper 4, which includes a financial statement supporting documentation for FY20 on October 2019 through 30 September 2019, and recommend that the Commission note the statements for FY20 as detailed in paper 04. Through the chair, I'd like to open it up for comment or question.
All right, thanks very much, Keith. Are there questions for Keith? Bob.
Yes, to the chair. Keith, on slide 10, if you could go back to that, there's a line there that has leases and contracts. And I noticed on a previous slide, the same number, it shows the year-to-date amount and then the annual budget. What's making up almost a $600,000 difference between those two?
Thank you, Commissioner Alverson, for the question. So just to rephrase your question to make sure I understand it, the difference of what was budgeted and what was expensed for that year?
Yes.
Is that the question? The answer to that is we were budgeted to be negative $759,000. We tried hard to get down to zero. We got down to $486,000 through cash basis. And if you look at accrual and include our accounts receivable and accounts payable at the end of the year, that would drop it, to 486. Without that, it was 686. So we tried to get down to zero. We weren't able to, but we were able to drop it considerably. And again, that 759 was a request from the Commission at the last AM 196 to, instead of transferring these monies from the FIS, but rather
the difference that you see.
So I think we did a pretty good job of trying to meet that mark.
So I guess my question is,
to what was approved as a...
Is that $1,900,000, are we expecting additional things that haven't been paid yet, or that's what it came in at?
Survey for those leasing contracts specifically related to vessels. So that also contributed to that difference that you see. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Through the Chair, I'll field that, and that is following a review of the contributions history for both contracting parties and related to the budget. There was a divergence some 20 years ago where additional funds commenced or were being received from the U.S.A. And a number of years later, some other increases from Canada, essentially getting to the point where we are today. And that has rolled forward as the means that we have been calculating the relative contributions from both contracting parties. Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies there. To specifically talk about those divergent.
That address your question, Bob?
It begins to. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bob. Peter?
Good morning, Keith. Thank you for that. My question is from page 3. We see that fish, I was curious if fish sales were fully collected. I noticed there was, sorry, maybe scroll down. I must have wrote it down. Maybe it was page 5. Just curious if you've collected all your sales, or we still have accounts receivable for fish sales. I think it, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner DeGreef, and through the chair, we were not finished collecting accounts receivable nor accounts payable. That was 100,000 and 300,000 pending, so a difference of about 200,000. And that's the difference when you see the slides that I show in accrual or cash basis. They will either include the pending accounts payable and accounts receivable with accrual or not in cash basis. So it did not include all the fish sales and accounts payable that were due for fish by year end, simply because it's just a timing issue.
Understood. So have we now collected them, many months later here? I just for my own, not for the financials, but I just want to confirm that we've.
Yes, sir. We'll actually show the updates to the budget in paper number 6.
Okay, one other question I have is in regards to liabilities, and I think my thing it's page 2. I'm just looking at, I didn't notice a liability. Sorry, I guess scroll down to. Must be different. Yeah. I didn't notice a liability for the scholarship fund. Is that still not a liability, and where would that be? Where would that?
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGreef. The scholarship is a expense item on the budget every year. Last year, it was a liability through an account that we had separately. That account was closed. And those monies were transferred to the general operating fund. Now annually, the scholarship will be a budgetary item, and that is in the budget under education.
Okay, so we've removed this as a liability going into the future, and just strictly an expense, an annual expense. Right?
That's correct.
Any other questions, Peter?
Yeah, I had a few, but I'll just throw it through.
All right, we can always come back. Glenn?
Chair, just briefly, if I may, sorry, I'm trying to get my webcam to operate. Let's see, going back to slide 6, and if you can enhance that a little bit, that might help for others. But my understanding is that under this, there would be a change in the pension liability between the U.S. and Canada. And my recollection in the past is that that pension liability has been split 50-50 between the contracting parties. I'm not aware of a specific decision point by the Commission on this, so I was wondering if you could help me understand why that shows as something different than a 50-50 split.
This morning of the total deficit amount. Our understanding is that it's meant to be a 50-50 split for that pension deficit. However, the variation that you see on the screen at the moment is 111,000 versus 139,000. To my initial understanding is that that is related to additional contributions made by Canada at the start of this calendar year, and those have been factored in over the 10-year repayment schedule, which has resulted in the Canadian 50% being reduced from 139,000 down to 111,000 per year.
So if I may, with a brief follow-up.
Yeah, you bet, Glenn.
So I guess I am aware that there has been a divergence in the contributions of the bilateral budget between the U.S. and Canada, but I was not aware that starting 20 years ago there had been a divergence in the pension liability between the two contracting parties. So I guess I was under the impression that this was a relatively recent change. And I guess, is that incorrect?
Those current numbers differing from Canada providing 139,000, for example. The other component that feeds into that is that the pension fund is reevaluated, or valued rather, every 3 years. And so in April of 2020, the International Fisheries Commission pension fund managed by Mercer underwent another valuation, and that results in a mid-10-year cycle reassessment of how much each contracting party would need to pay to diminish that deficit. And so, as you saw previously, I think it was 165 off the top of my head, and now it's been revalued as 139. And we did receive another letter from Mercer this morning, and we're just processing that and just to confirm what the amounts are that need to be paid moving forward. Thank you, Chair. Great, thank you very much. So through the Chair, if we could have that presentation for paper 05, please.
Does that address it for you, Glenn, or do you need more information?
I guess I'll just note that the accompanying report for the paper states that it's a 50-50 split. So I guess it sounds like that contribution from Canada has been amortized over a series of years. I think that helps me understand it a little bit better. I don't want to take undue time here now, but perhaps this is a conversation we can have offline. I just want to understand the potential discrepancy between those two. I do have other questions, but I can come back to those after others have had an opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I had a question as well. I noticed in one of the other fiscal years, Dave, that the amounts were different for the U.S. too. I think it was like 126,000 and something versus the 139 that's reported for fiscal year 2020. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that Canada paid some additional money and that to cover the pension deficit greater than the U.S. did, and that's why there's current difference. But if I cast that correctly,
report itself. Now, just a little bit of background. Obviously, this is the intent of this paper is to provide you with that independent external auditor's report, which is required by Regulation 14 of the Financial Regulations. And if you cast your minds back to the 15th of October 2020, in accordance with that Regulation 14.1 of the Financial Regulations, we requested of the Commission an intersessional recommendation, initially from the Finance and Administration Committee and then to the Commission, to appoint a new independent external statement auditor for the IPHC, and that was done through IPHC Circular 2020-023, which is available on the website also. A few days later, on the 18th of October, and subsequent to Circular 23, and again in accordance with Rule 11,
all right, thanks, Dave. So I guess Glenn will need to see what those reevaluations are and how they factor into what the parties are paying.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That makes sense to me.
While we're on this page, I had a question as well. It's under 4100 grants, contracts, and agreements, and it has 635,000 as actual, and then budgeted 449,562. I guess I have a two-part question. What's in the grants, contracts, and agreements, and why the difference between budget and actual?
Yes, through the chair. The difference is what was budgeted. The 449 was budgeted as presented at AMO 96 for catch effort statistics. What was not budgeted that we received was grant funding for research. These grants had closed out, and there was a little bit of money that came in. I believe it was 86,000. You'll see it on the other slide, but that was from the SK grant and then also the NPRB grant that research had. It was not presented in the budget previously, but you see the expenses here of actual. So that breakdown is between catch effort statistics, the 03 statistics fund, and 02 research for the research fund.
So what would happen going forward then, Keith? So the grant money came in after you thought it was, but now you would still undertake to do that work in the next fiscal?
Well, through the chair, as we meet quarterly, we would want, if we received any additional grant funding or any funding whatsoever, we would want to present that intercessionally through our quarterly meetings to give you an update. And we expect to do that this year as well. I know that Dr. Planis is applying for additional grants. We're updating our registration to receive grants as an organization, and we do foresee receiving additional grant money moving forward. When I present the slides to show the income by fund, you'll see the breakdown in the budget for money coming in for research through a grant, and then also money coming in for catch effort statistics through a grant. That is in
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Are there other questions for Keith on this item? Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I think there are some issues about how we want to represent the contributions from the contracting parties, whether we're looking at an equal share or what's displayed here. I don't know that we need to get into that issue exactly at this point under this agenda item, but at some point would like to circle back on that more generally. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when we get into the next one on fiscal 2021 might be the place, Glenn. Peter.
Yeah, thanks again, Keith. I know this has been a transition to a new accounting program, but could you just slide down one to slide 7? And we have vessel expenses. I noticed, that's quite a significant amount. Are we splitting out, considering we don't own a vessel, what kind of expenses are those? Is that the combination of fuel paid for, or just if you could explain that new budgetary or that new.
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGrief. This one here was just moved up. We're just more properly accounting for it. You see in the annual budget there was nothing there, and then it was previously under other fees and charges. The expenses that are incurred are through the vessel expenses. So these are the charter vessels that we charter for the FIS. and the expenses that are incurred through FIS for that purpose. The contracts for FIS would fall under leases and contracts, 52.
Yeah, understood. I appreciate the differentiation. But the majority of that would be, would you say, would be fuel? Just
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGreve. I'm going to have to punt on that one and get back to you and pull up the report to see exactly what those expenses are. I can absolutely do that on the break.
no problem. Just one other line item that I was curious about was professional fees. And is that the same? We've reclassified some of our designation of professional fees, and that's why the significant uptick in actual versus budgeted.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct, and I can dive into that one as well to show what those actual expenses are at a further line item. So this is a summary of those expenses, and as you can imagine, through our core accounting system, we can drill down to each one of these further.
Okay, thank you. I was just confirming that that's what was happening there. Thank you very much.
All right. Last chance for any questions on FY 2020. I don't see any more, Keith, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item, the auditor's report.
Made the following decision, and that was recorded as Intersessional Decision 015, whereby the IPHC Finance and Administration Committee recommended, and the Commission subsequently appointed, the external auditor, Moss Adams, to audit the Commission's accounts for FY 2020, and then as part of the regulations as a 3-year contract being developed. On the 6th of November, Moss Adams was contracted by the Secretariat to undertake our statement audit for 2020, and subsequently that same day, in accordance with paragraph 2 of Regulation 14, we provided the external auditor with the provided by client list of items on that same day. This was 37 days after the end of the fiscal year and 23 days ahead of the rule, the 60-day rule incorporated within the financial regulations. A couple of weeks later, on the 18th of December, and in accordance with paragraph 7, Regulation 14 of the regulations, the independent auditors provided their final report to the Secretariat. Again, this was 79 days after the end of the fiscal year, which is 11 days ahead of the deadline set forth in the IPHC financial regulations. So good news on that front. The Commission sat with the auditor's report for a number of weeks to review in detail the written report, which is provided as Appendix 1 of Paper 05, and subsequently on the 8th of January 2021, the report of the independent auditors and financial statements was provided directly from the auditors to the Commissioners via web conference for initial noting. And so with that, I don't intend on going through the presentation, the appendix in full, but at this point we're simply asking the FAC to note the independent external auditor's report and recommend that the Commission accept the independent auditor's report for FY 2020. And I apologize for that slide. I'm not sure why that has changed from what was published. And with that, I will pass back to the Chair. Thank you. Great, thank you. And I'll pass to the Assistant Director, Keith Jernigan. Yes, Chair. If all Commissioners could just put your video on pause and microphone on mute and stay online, that would be appreciated. Thank you, Chair. If you could just try your microphone there, Paul. Yes, I can hear you, Richard. Okay. Try and just adjust everything. Commissioner Ryall, if you can just test your speaker's microphone as well. Chair, are you there? Can you hear us loud and clear? Now we can, yes, thank you. Yes, we can. All right, we will pass to you to reconvene. Over to you, Chair. Great. Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to pass to System Director Keith Jernigan to run us through. Over to you, Keith. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll take the initial part, and then we can talk a little bit about healthcare as needed. Just confirming you can hear me. Sorry, my microphone's a little far away from.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Are there questions for Dave on the auditor's report? The only thing I would note, Dave, as well, is that we're not asking questions, I would say, at this point in time, because we did have a chance to speak with the auditor, and so we understand what is already being presented and have had a chance to ask questions. And so I think at this point, we have no other comments on the auditor's report and can move on to the next agenda item on the number 6 on the 2021 budget update.
In a way, it will be quite negligible within that 5%. Thank
you, Dr. Wilson, and through the chair as we wait for paper 6 to come up. This is a FY21 budget update, and as per the paper, this is to provide the Commission with an update on the approved FY21 budget. That's 1 October 2020 through 30 September 2021. At the 96th session of the IPHC interim meeting, IM096, the Commission reviewed and adopted a revised budget. For FY21, as per the paper, we provided an update as of 30 November. And this is, you'll see consolidated, but then when we get into the most recent update as of 15 January, you'll see it by fund. And again, following that same pattern of a consolidated review of the funds, but then further on, as we want to migrate to showing each fund balance, you'll see that in this paper. So as of 30 November, we received all of the contributions from Canada contracting party and half from the U.S. as indicated on slide 3. For the pension, we received 100% of the payment from Canada, and we received word this morning, in fact, that the U.S. is now prepared to pay the second half of the contracting party contribution and also the pension. We also have on here the headquarters lease, where we received half of that, and presumably the U.S. is prepared to send that payment as well. We have contracts and grants listed here. The actual is the 450 received for catch effort statistics. And then in the annual budget, we're including the research money, funds that would come in. And then again, as I spoke earlier, we'll look at doing an update moving forward. And you'll see that in the coming slides. This is income. The next slide is expenses, consolidated, all funds, or general fund budget. And again, this was the first couple of slides just to mimic, what was in the auditor's report and how it's been presented for the last number of decades. And we're moving towards this fund accounting to show the assets, liabilities, and equity. So here you'll, this is the budget that was approved at the IM 096 and where we're at as of 30 November. This is the supplemental fund budget as of 30 November. And again, this is as presented through the auditor's report. And will continue, but this will, you'll see this as no longer supplemental, you'll see this as FIS. I think Peter DeGrief had a question previously on the FIS income. This is a slide for as of 30 November. So anything that didn't come in at 30 September here as well. And this is the expense for the supplemental as of 30 November. Okay, FY21, next set of slides. First one, as of 15 January, it's all funds. So for the commission, this is where we stand as of 15 January for all funds, income and expenses. Still showing the amount that we received from the contracting parties for the pension, for general operating expenses, and for the headquarters lease, as well as the grant income. Now this slide is specific for 10 general, for general operating expenses as of 15 January 2021. The income that we received to date, this isn't broken out as you saw on the previous slide, but you noted that it's only less than 50%, and that's just due to not receiving the second half of the payment from the U.S. from. This slide is for research, the research fund, and this one was the one I noted previously where we would like to, as we move through this year, Dr. Planis is working on additional grant funding, and once these grants are reviewed and approved, then we would provide updates to the 20 research budget, and of course, budget year to date. Statistics as of 15 January, showing the grants and contract agreements coming in for the catch effort statistics and cost recovery in Alaska. And then the expenses, this is collectively for 30 statistics. So this is not just Alaska, but this is coastline. For FY21, the FIS budget as of 15 January, noting that this is as it is without any modifications to the FIS design or the budget for FIS. This is simply where we're at as of the 15th of January. Income received and the expenses to date on a cash basis. With this paper, we request that the FAC note paper 6, which provides an update to the FY21 budget for the first period through 30 November and then also through 15 January, but for the entire year. Recommend that the Commission note the update to FY21 as detailed in paper 6.
All right, thanks very much, Keith. Questions for Keith from Commissioners? Keith, I had a question while others think about whether they do. Oh, before I go, Peter, I see you have a question.
Yeah, can we go back to slide 9? Sorry. Yeah, research. So we're anticipating some more income coming in for expected grants to cover these salaries and wages. Is that how I'm reading this?
We're expecting additional, through the chair, thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGrief. we are expecting additional grant income to cover research expenses for the particular project. I will also note that the General Operating Fund has also provided funding for research. So both internal transfer from the Commission, the Secretariat, for research, and then also for grant income.
Okay, good. Okay, that better understanding. Yeah, so it's not expected to be strictly from grants coming in. This is also from the operating fund as well.
All right, thanks, Peter. Could you go back to slide 3, Keith? Thanks. I assume that your answer to this question is the same as one to Peter. I just noticed, like, on where it says pensions from Canada and the U.S., there's a budget amounts for Canada and the U.S., and it's showing that actual for Canada is $111,250, but I suppose at this point the U.S. has not contributed that amount yet?
Through the chair, they have not contributed to the pension or the second half of the payment.
I see.
As of this morning, we did receive an email and requested that we resubmit the invoice for the second half.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks, Keith. Any other questions on this particular budget item? I'm not seeing any. Just wondering what commissioners would like to do. I notice it's about 10:15. I suspect the next 3 budget items will take up some time. Do people want to take a break now and then get into item 7 after a break, or do you want to start on 7? What's the preference? Glenn, do you have a preference?
Mr. Chair, I think it probably makes sense for us to take a brief break and then come back and address 7 et al.
Okay. Would 15 minutes be good? 20? What do you think?
20 sounds great.
Let's say 20. All right. Let's get back in 20 minutes. So 25 to 11, we'll reconvene. Thank you. Dave, do we just pause here and leave everything up and running?
Experience with those over the last few years has been that it's been around that 5%, sometimes higher, but sometimes lower. At this we can't predict solidly what those premiums might increase by, and so it is an estimate. Keith, did you want to add anything?
Dave, can you hear me?
Chair,
you're coming in really broken on my end. I don't know if it's just me or not, but your volume's low and you're cutting out.
Is the amortized amount over 10 years for both contracting parties combined. So the revised IFC pension deficit payment to be received from the U.S. would be $127,848,000. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and through the chair, thank you for the question.
Can you hear me?
It's really a bit of both. I mean,
Hello?
it's one of those situations where we do
I hit the
have
little button on the headset.
Secretariat staff, for want of a better description, and so the relative premiums do.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave. So we're on to budget item number 7, and for fiscal year 2022, and you're seeking approval for that particular budget item, and also you're going to give us up information on fiscal years 2023 and 2024 under this agenda item. So I think we're ready to go. Everyone else is here? It looks like. So over to you, Dave.
So to speak. And just as an example, we do have annual changes in the number of
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And through the chair, this is paper number 7, budget estimates for FY22 for approval, and then budgets for FY23 and 24 for information. These budgets include an overall increase of 5% by both contracting parties. I'm going to skip down to Appendix 1. I apologize for the eye candy. And Secretariat, can you zoom in a little bit on that PDF to make it a little bit bigger? So here what you'll see is the budget by fund, the 10 general operating along with statistics, research, and FIS, and then a total. We have the income broken down. And we also have, I wanted to show here on this slide, down on grants, contracts, and agreements. That should be a gray line item. It may seem that the total interest income is listed in part there, but just a formatting correction there that grants and contracts is not part of interest income. It is actually just grant income. And here under research is where we would update this budgetary line item for any additional grants that were approved for us in FY 2021. Likewise, any grant, 2022. Likewise, for those grants and multi-year grants, they would show up also in 2023 and 2024 for research. This second part here is a more broken down section of the paper for the expenses. Again, by fund. For personnel expenses, operational expenses, fees and contracts, facilities and equipment expenses, and then other. The other expenses I want to bring to your attention, not just the budget contingency, but the cost recovery from 30 and 50, and then the bond cost recovery from 40. That is research statistics, and then also FIS. These line items show the income recovered from those funds to the general operating or back. So it's cost recovery from FIS, and then for statistics and research, the general operating funds are being transferred from 10 to statistics and to research to help fund those programs. Whereas FIS is a cost recovery paying back 10 general for their expenses. Now here you can clearly show or see those transfers, and this would constitute a funds transfer in the core accounting system between those funds, and you would see that on the fund activity summary for the period end, the quarter, when we do a quarterly report, and of course year end. Appendix 2 is FY 2023 and FY 2024. Again, noting that once we do get an approved grant or other source of income or contracting party updates for the pension or headquarters lease, we would work intersessionally to update the budgets as those numbers are provided. And then down here for expenses. Now, I did note on the previous presentation that we did receive word from the plan administrator. Actually, Dr. Wilson made the mention that we received word from the plan administrator for the Pension Society of the updated numbers for FY22. I'll just slide back up here real quick. And the indication is the budget shortfall is $255,696. So in that case, with the plan indicating that's a 50-50 split, and that would be $127,848 for each IFC pension for Canada and then the pension for the United States of America. Those updates would carry on throughout here. And I wanted to also indicate, down at the bottom, unlike FY20 where there was a negative $874,000 on the budget that Commissioner Alverson pointed out, here we're budgeted to zero. That's the goal, a balanced budget. Likewise with FY 2023 and 2024. By fund, and these budgets can be presented consolidated, right, as a position for the commission, but to show it by the fund breakdown for income and expense at the detail level is important. Commissioner DeGrief had asked about the vessel expenses and professional fees, and you can see some of the subcategories within here on that. Again, across the board, this was a 5% increase from 2021, and that carries through 2022, 2023, and 2024. All balanced to zero. And with this paper, we are requesting that the FAC note paper 7, which provides the FAC with the budget estimates for FY22, and recommend the commission and for 2023 and 2024 for information. So for 2022, we're recommending to the commission, and then for 2023 and 2024, it's for information. Noting for FY 2022, we would be providing updates throughout this fiscal year as additional income and expenses came to know. We are recommending the commission adopt the FY 22 budget today, and note the tentative budgets for FY 2023 and FY 2024. Chair, back to you.
All right, thanks very much, Keith. Just see what questions commissioners have for you and maybe Dave. Neil.
Thanks for that summary. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fine, Neil.
Keith, I had a question about the 5% increase and wanted a little more information about each of the three things that are cited here as the rationale for it. So cost of living, step increases, and increases in healthcare costs. I wondered if in particular, if the step increases, if that's based on an actual assessment of projections of staff on hand and kind of any accounting for attrition or replacement of staff, assuming that new staff coming on would be starting at lower steps, or if it's just a more general forecast. And then also wanted to understand better what are the drivers of the increases to healthcare costs.
The number of spouses, and that's really just something that fluctuates. In terms of other potential increases, we have had these plans in place for quite a number of years now. We have silver, gold, and platinum plans, and staff are spread over all of those plans depending on their risk tolerance. But other than that, I'm not sure I can add too much more. It's really just a case of what our provider indicates to us as our premium rates, depending on the makeup of staff. And Keith, I'll just look to you to see if there's anything else you wanted to add. Thank you for the question, Chair. I think we can summarize the discussion based on what I've heard, and I'll read what would currently be going into the report. And it's essentially noting the paper with the relative budget for FY22 and the contributions that are outlined in that paper, and then also that the FAC recommended that the IPHC Secretariat facilitate an intersessional process among the two contracting parties and the Secretariat, whereby the annual IPHC budget and contracting party contributions would be discussed and potentially finalized for 2022 and future years. Something along those lines, Chair, would be sufficient. Yes, I do, Chair. That's
Wilson. That actually sums it up really, really nicely. You know, their estimates based on what we know with the staff and the healthcare costs that we've seen this year.
All right. Neil, other questions? Neil, if you had other questions, we're not hearing you.
You can hear me now. I don't have any further questions at this time. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Glenn.
Brief question, if I may. On the pension liability shortfall of $127K per party, is that in addition to the amount that's shown? In other words, would the U.S. pension invoice now be $267,000, or would it be $127,000 and change?
Thank you. A paper that was requested by the Commission primarily as a result of the discussions at AM096, where you asked the Secretariat to review the investment policy that was included as an appendix to the paper and to provide a simplified, revised version. And so that was the primary impetus initially for this revision to the IPHC financial regulations. And in addition to that, subsequent to the various reviews.
Other questions, Glenn?
Why don't I wait until we've all had a chance to ask additional questions?
Sure. Peter.
Thank you very much, Keith. I have a question, just follow up on Neil's question, actually, and that has to do with the increase in healthcare costs. I know that in 2019 we moved to a better plan for staff. Just curious as to how much of that increased cost is due to a better plan, or how much would be just inflationary pressures on the healthcare?
So we've also made a number of additional revisions which are outlined in the discussion area of this paper, specifically to align the financial regulations with the IPHC rules of procedure, to move towards becoming GAP compliant over the next couple of years. As I mentioned, to revise and simplify the IPHC funds and investment policy, and to just bring up to date some of the minor terminology used throughout the financial regulations. And to walk you through some of those key modifications, I'm going to pass to the Assistant Director, Keith Janigan. Thank you, Chair. Yes. If I could, Chair. Yeah, it's certainly worth exploring, and this is one of the elements that we've taken up over the past year as we've become more involved with the dealings of the Pension Society. And unfortunately, the internal governance and accounting practices at the Pension Society have been wanton, for want of a better description. But the intent is that those
thank you, Dr. Wilson. I think that pretty much sums it up. The healthcare costs are going up. We have additional folks choosing, some of the better plans. The additional monies provided for health insurance are enticing folks to choose, one of the better plans. Again, as you stated, we have 3 plans that are optional, from a lot of out-of-pocket expenses and less cost to the employer to, more cost to the employer and less out-of-pocket expenses to the employee. And as more employees choose the Platinum plan, that is less cost out of their pocket, but cost us more, then it does go up. But I think that's pretty much summing it up, Dr. Wilson. Thank you.
Does that cover it for now, Peter, or do you have other questions?
No, I think that covers that question. I do have a unrelated question, but I think from the answers that it's complicated. The other question I had was just in regards to the budgetary item of salaries and wages, in particular for FIS. And I noted that from the accounting fund that in 2020, it was budgeted at it was realized as an actual as $727,000. So just if you could help explain the difference between the $478,000 listed in the $727,000 that was an actual from last year.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Griffin, through the chair. For FIS and the benefits for those folks, we in FY20 we incorporated them into the same employee class, our fishery data specialist. As we've learned more moving forward, we need to create a for the frontline survey specialists that are deployed to our chartered research vessels. And offer them different benefits. However, in FY20, we offer them the same benefits as the fishery data specialist, noting that their time of employment, the duration of employment, and what they do for us is different. And this year, before we hire them, it will be a different employee class, which offers different benefits. So this is another line item that we will update this year as we move forward to what the actual budgeted expense is expected to be when we develop that employee class specifically for the seasonal staff that deploy on FIS.
Okay, so you're referring to benefits. I was just more curious, just strictly salaries and wages. There seemed to be a difference between actual this year and what you're forecasting for the budgets, or the proposed budget.
All right. Any other questions, Peter?
Maybe I was on mute, but I think.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Well, people think about that. I had one just going back to the pension, Keith. So it shows 111,250 and 139,424. And just to make sure I'm clear, the new figures there, based upon the updated information, would be 127,800 and some dollars for each party. Is that what would go in those two rows?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct, based on the letter that we received this morning from the plan administrator.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, through the chair, for Commissioner DeGreef, that difference was a reduced footprint for FIS.
All right, if there's no more questions, don't see any hands up. So is there a motion for approval of the F2022 budget and a note 2023 and 2024 for information? Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how you want to handle this, but I think perhaps there may be a difference of view on whether or not we will be able to approve this budget at this time during this meeting. I suppose we could do this a couple of ways. One would be to take a vote on this particular budget. Another would be perhaps to just have a discussion about the difference of views between the two parties.
I think I would prefer the latter at this point, Glenn, and have a discussion about the differences and see if we can figure that out, and if not, then come have a discussion about a way forward.
I guess with that, then we would be prepared to at least start that conversation if that's acceptable to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks,
sure.
Mr. Chair, and I put myself on webcam, so hopefully you can see me as well. One of the issues I think that we highlighted, the U.S. highlighted, Commissioner Oliver did during the interim meeting, was some concern about the way in which the budgetary process was unfolding between the U.S. and Canada. And in particular, I think we sought to highlight a couple of issues, one of which is the share of the costs between the contracting parties. Since the interim meeting, we have had an opportunity to have discussions with our Department of State, who is responsible both for interpreting treaty language as well as the financial obligations of the United States. And I think the United States would like to take this time to express a concern that we have about the pattern of contributions between the contracting parties and a potential inconsistency with our understanding of Article 3 of the 1979 Protocol. Specifically, I think the issue at play for the U.S. is that Article 3 of the Protocol states that joint expenses incurred by the Commission shall be paid by the two parties in equal shares. That is the language that we believe should be operational for the Commission. We fully recognize that over an extended period of years that there has not been an equal share of the joint expenses between the two contracting parties. However, I think we did indicate a desire to review this issue and to rebalance the potential contributions between the contracting parties, understanding that this is a decision that we make on an annual basis. As part of our review process, we also undertook an evaluation as to whether or not we could find any indication that the parties had agreed to anything other than an equal share. Specifically, within Article 3 of the Protocol, it goes on to state that, quote, however, upon recommendation of the Commission, the parties may agree to vary the proportion of such joint expenses to be paid by each party. after March 31st, 1981. After a review of our records within the Department of Commerce as well as the Department of State, we could find no record that the parties had agreed to a distribution of the funds between the contracting parties that differed from an equal share. Again, we do have the practice that we have engaged in, but we cannot find a record that that is a formal recommendation by the Commission that has been adopted by the contracting parties. Given these factors, we believe that it would be appropriate for both capitals to have an opportunity to have an extended discussion on this issue and see if we can resolve some of the potential discrepancies either in the interpretation of Article 3 or if there is consistency in the interpretation of Article 3, find a path forward so that we can begin to rebalance the contributions between the contracting parties. I think another subsidiary issue that the United States is also interested in reviewing is a number of the additional mechanisms that are used by the Secretariat to gain funding from the United States. I think we've heard in the presentation on this particular item that there is additional funding that the IPHC receives from NOAA directly each year to supplement the additional costs of management that were incurred with the implementation of the Halibut and Sablefish IFQ program. There is not a similar mechanism or protocol in place for the Canadian, I believe it's the ITQ program, that has similar additional costs that might have been incurred once that program was implemented due to the extension of the seasons and the additional staff time and costs that are necessary in order to manage that fishery. I think all of these issues are important ones for us to review. I think it will be difficult for us at this particular meeting to be able to come to resolution on these issues. However, we would like to have a continued discussion with Canada on these issues and hopefully come to resolution. I also would like to note that the United States is fully aware that we would like to come to resolution quickly so that we are able to provide the Secretariat with a clear indication of what a budget will be for FY 2022, as well as an indication to the public who rely on the services of the Secretariat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Glenn, for that overview. I guess I'd offer up a couple of comments myself. Let's just start with the funding and record of funding. The record of funding that I have in front of me shows that it was a 50-50 share of contributions by the parties up until the year 2000. And then in 2001 it changed, and it changed a number of times from 2000 on. So over those 20 years, the share has deviated substantially from 50-50, and roughly currently it's around, I would say, 18% from Canada and 82% from the U.S. And it went up and down a little bit, but that's what it currently resides at in that ballpark for the last number of fiscal years. As far as the records or lack of records, I think the records for what was contributed by the parties is pretty clear that over those 21 years that the parties contributed funds consistently, and that the Commission adopted a budget and spent money consistently based upon those budgets. So I guess from our point of view, when we go forward and make recommendations as commissioners to our minister, part of that is what the budget is, and the minister has signed off on that, and money's been allocated to fund the IPHC. I would have assumed that something similar would have happened in the U.S., but maybe it's a different process, and maybe just needs some more work to find records. But I can assure you that we have records that show that we've had discussions and sought permission to fund as we have for the last 21 years with deviations from 50-50, which would have required, as you pointed out in the Article 3, that you can vary from 50-50 based upon recommendations from the Commission, and that's adopted by the parties. I think there's a couple of other items too. You noted about the grants that are funding that are provided, as well as the party contribution for the work for the IPHC to undertake to gather data on halibut and sablefish. Based upon information that I've seen, is that some of that data collection is this benefits solely the U.S. and not the management of halibut. Similarly, within U.A, it's currently managed by the IPHC, and that really, as I understand, is a transition underway, is a transition to be undertaken as management by the United States. But for quite a number of years, that has been managed by the IPHC at some considerable cost. I think those items need to be more fully fleshed out and understood, what those costs are to the IPHC and what the benefits are for the parties and to the management of IPHC and halibut resource overall. As you pointed out, Glenn, I think we won't be able to resolve that here at this particular meeting, but I'm confident that we will be able to find a way forward and figure out what we will do for a budget going forward. As you pointed out, the timing to do this is somewhat short. I guess I'm a little bit disappointed too that to have this come up at this meeting with not much notice is probably we could have spent some time earlier working on this. So I'm committed, as Canada is committed, to working with the U.S. as we always have been as a party in this convention to move forward and figure out a solution. I think the way that you cast it, as far as I think we as commissioners need to work with our respective State Department of Global Affairs and International Affairs in Canada, and I would suggest probably the IPH Secretariat will need to be involved so that we can figure out a budget for 2022 and improve that in a relatively quick fashion. So other than that, I think at this point, we will not be able to agree at this point in time. We need to do some more work and gather some more data so that we can figure out a solution. So I think I'll stop there and see, Glenn, if you had anything else you wanted to add, and then I was going to see if any of the other commissioners had anything they wanted to say on this item.
Chair, I appreciate that. I think the only comment that I would make is I am hopeful that we will be able to come to some resolution on this issue moving forward. I guess perhaps we have a slightly different perspective on this. I believe the U.S. was fairly clear that this was an issue of concern for us at the interim meeting, and I know that we've had an opportunity to have some discussions on this. This is a decision point for the Commission, but I do believe that we have expressed a concern about this in the past, and we continue to express a concern. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move forward to address this. Thanks.
All right. All right. Thanks, Glenn. Any other commissioners wanted to provide comments or any further suggestions, recommendations on a way forward? Peter.
Yeah, just a clarification with Glenn on something he said that the parties, there was no formal agreement of how the monies would be split. Just curious how you view adopting and recommending past budgets and how the monies were split there, which was approved by the commissioners. Just how do you not view those as formal recommendations?
Through the chair, yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGreef. My understanding of the provisions in Article 3 is that it operates very similarly to the way that our annual management measure process operates. In other words, there is a formal letter to governments, which would then go to the Secretary of State in the U.S., and then with the concurrence of the Secretary of Commerce, that becomes an official enacted or enabled recommendation from the commission. What we don't have is that step of letters to government that would enable that specific budget. I don't want to get into too many details here because I think that we start to get into treaty interpretation issues, which we can discuss in great detail. We've had the opportunity to have some of those discussions with our Department of State legal counsel, and I think perhaps the next time that we get together to discuss this issue would be helpful for us to provide our understanding, and then perhaps from Canada's perspective, if there's a different interpretation of that particular wording of Article 3, that would be helpful to have as well.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Peter, does that cover your question? I see your hand down.
Yeah, basically, I think there just needs to be further discussion in sometime in the future, and I agree that this may not be the best forum to.
All right, thanks, Peter. Dave, do you need a motion from the commissioners on this in particular to formalize
the Commission should be requesting and considering at the FAC meeting is a detailed report from the Society on the contributions that have been received and accounted for. One of the other issues we face is that the Society isn't audited, and it's something that we've been pushing for the last year and a half or so. I believe there's going to be a Society meeting towards the end of February, and then its annual meeting will be a couple of months later, and these are all matters that should be raised and to improve the accountability and transparency of the contracting party funds to pay down those deficits. Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I may suggest.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Well, we'll have a chance to review the language over the next few days. Is that agreeable with you, Glenn?
I guess one question is first whether or not this is a process that is facilitated by the Secretariat, or is this a process that we are undertaking in sort of a capital to capital discussion? And I think those are slightly different things. I think maybe a capital to capital discussion is really what we have in mind here, but I will stop and ask if that's a shared understanding.
I think that's my view as well, Glenn. I was going to seek some additional guidance from our NH headquarters folks, but I would say that that's our view of how we'd move forward. I do think we'll probably be seeking and need support from the Secretariat as we go forward on this, on questions that we'll have, and so I see there's a role, but I see this as a party-to-party and commissioner involvement to figure out a way forward.
Thank you, Chair. That's my understanding as well. And then I guess my second question would be, can we at least tentatively agree on some sort of timeline? When would we like to have these initial discussions? When would you have an opportunity to coordinate with your responsible parties, Global Affairs Canada, or whomever you need to discuss these issues with? And then when would we be able to sort of circle back?
I don't think I could give a definitive answer right now, Glenn. I guess one of the folks is participating in the call right now, and so he'll be hearing all this and thinking about how we move forward and contacting his colleagues. So I think later in this week we'll have an answer.
Appreciate that.
And how about yourself, as far as timing? Are you thinking of some particular time?
We've already had some of these initial discussions, and we will continue them.
Okay. That's useful to know. I think this then would close out this discussion unless there's any other questions. I'm not seeing any, and Dave, I think you have what you need at this point.
Traditionally, what happens is...
All right. With that, then we'll move on to budget. We'll move on to item number 8, the financial regulations that have revisions.
Amendments to the financial regulations and passes those to the Commission for consideration. In this case, it would be that the FAC is agreeing to a range of additional amendments to the Rev 1 that's currently before the FAC and agrees that the Secretariat and the contracting parties would work essentially between now and before the close of the AM to present a new document, whether it be a Rev 2 or whether it be an information paper on the financial regulations to the Commission for adoption. Given the timing, the time frame, that would probably by necessity be limited to the minor amendments that have been proposed and also those that are shown in red line text. It would then be a case that the Commission will hopefully adopt those revised financial regulations for 2021, and then at the same time noting that these other areas are going to be discussed intersessionally for a further revision to the financial regulations later in 2021. That's how it potentially could work logistically over the next 12 months. Thank you, Chair. Great, thank you very much, Chair. So if we could have paper 9 brought up on the screen, please. While that's being brought up, this should be a relatively short discussion. This is amendments that were requested again at the last annual meeting based on discussions and interim meeting based on discussions around the number of intersessional meetings and decisions that the
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And through the chair, I will step through some of the major updates we've made to the financial regulations, jumping down to Regulation 10. Regulation 10 funds. So the first component here, as Dr. Wilson was indicating, doing away with the appendix for the investment policy and instead simplifying that policy for both our cash accounts and our retirement accounts. For our cash accounts, we've minimized our cash accounts from 13 to 3. With a simple checking, savings, and an investment account. And that's where those monies would be held. Certificates of deposit shall not exceed or extend beyond 12 months. And again, the purpose of this is to make sure that we have that working capital. Just continuing on that note of the need for working capital. And while that money is sitting there in the account, earning some interest on those monies. Likewise, for the retirement accounts, generally speaking, an increase of total return 6% after inflation over a typical 3 to 5 year investment series. So overall, the changes to funds and reporting and audit components in these regulations is moving towards this fund accounting and further defining, where the money is within the Commission. So there shall be, a checking and savings account and an investment account for the monies, and those are at Wells Fargo. The accounts that we had at other institutions were closed as previously reported. Fund accounting will be established to track assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses, called general, research, statistics, FIS, and reserve. And again, that's just aligning with the presentation of the financial activities and position of the Commission that we presented today. Whereas the general fund shall be contracting party contributions to support expenditures of the Commission. So in this regard, the following shall be credited to the general fund. One change here is interest earned by the checking and savings accounts, cash accounts. Again, that's where the contracting party contributions are coming into. receipts from the sale of fish related to Pacific halibut research or operations and not related to fish. And this gets back to Commissioner DeGrief's question or comment about funding the research and catch-upper statistics. And this is exactly that. That if we have a research grant that requires to conduct research and catch fish, those sales will be credited to general to be available for additional research. Salaries and benefits of secretariat staff related to general administration of the IPHC. And we've added the following funds would be credited to the research fund. We also added a line paragraph for the statistics fund. But for research, receipts and grants, contracts related to Pacific halibut research, contributions received by the contracting parties as internal fund transfers to the general fund. Again, that gets back to the previous schedule and report of fund transfers and the fund activity summary and how we would transfer funds from the 10 general operating into research to fund those activities. The salaries and the benefits for secretariat staff related to research. The following shall be credited to the statistics fund. Receipts from grants and contracts related to catch-upper statistics of Pacific halibut and contributions received by the contracting parties as internal fund transfers from the 10 general fund. The next paragraph, just cleaning up the language and specifically calling out the FISH, the Fishery Independent Setline Survey Fund.